Welcome to what is titled as the Future of Games or Future of Play panel. So my name's Lynn Love. I'm a lecturer at Abertay University in computer art, and I also make strange interactive media experiences that like to make people feel a bit awkward, and I guess a bit of shameless self-promo. If you're around tonight, we're bringing along one of the games that we've made, and we'd love for you to come and play it. But today is not about me, it's about my lovely panellists and the future of playing games. So just to sort of put a little bit of context around what we're going to talk about, it's been advertised as the future of play, the future of games, and I think play and games are kind of used quite interchangeably, but games are kind of a subset of play. And actually we've got a really talented panel who work with interactive media and with architecture and blurring the boundaries between real and virtual space. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sidestep a little bit from the title of the panel and try to interrogate that a little bit as we go through.
I'm Darran Anderson. I write about architecture and space and computer games because I'm a nerd.
Hi, I'm Hilary O'Shaughnessy. I work at Watershed in Bristol, and I produce programs like Playful that you might have heard of, and I also do a lot of work with Now Play This in London.
I'm Tom. Well, I'm really loud. I'm broadcasting on 606.5 megahertz. I'm co-founder of the Biome Collective, which is based in Dundee. I'm an artist and designer, and inspired by both of these guys and the areas that they work in terms of architecture and the idea of playable cities. When you first discussed this, you were talking about what is play and what are games, and I thought that was an interesting sort of jumping off point, because I think it's something that gets brought up a lot. What's the difference between play and games, and what is play? And it's basically like what is art, or what is God, or what is any of these big things. But I felt like, is that just me? Do I think about it too much? So I looked up play, etymology of play, and it's like 7 pages long description, and that's just the noun. That's just the verb, let alone the noun. So it's this incredibly broad subject area. And for me, I guess it's everything that's in the kind of classical descriptions of it. Essentially, it's just something that is one thing and another, whether that's a human or a system of particles or a building or a city or an idea. It's a couple of things interacting with each other, and I guess that's the kind of baseline. So for me, whether or not you call it a game or whether or not you call it a video game, it's just an interaction between different systems, and so it could be anything, and that's my approach, which I guess is quite playful in itself. And so it doesn't really matter what the systems are, it's just the fun of the in-between.
That's nice. I'm going to steal that sentence sometime. The fun of the in-between. Yeah, there's. I'm just thinking about it this morning. Like when I came into this building, it's such a cool space. You're like, you just want to run around or like get a scooter. So you don't want to go, I will have a coffee and act like an adult. And there's something freeing about these huge spaces that I think we should be using, that we're so lucky to have, and we have the privilege. We forget this all the time. We have the privilege to like act the maggot in public space. In the UK you can, not everywhere, or not everyone to the same degree. I understand that's quite complex, but largely we still have the freedom to do lots of things in public space, and that's a privilege we should be using all the time and unleashing our creativity in a way that is not possible in your homes.
I would agree entirely. I mean, there's an interesting thing that Brian Eno said about art. He said art's like all the superfluous things that you don't have to do. So you have to wear clothes, but you don't really have to have great fashion. Or, so it's all this extra stuff, and it's how we kind of fill our days and interact. But I think, like I work with a lot of architects, and there's a certain amount that game designers can learn from architecture and actual urban space, but there's so much that architects can learn from sort of imaginary spaces of games, the flow of people, the interactions. And I think for me, the future of that is really a synthesis of the two. You can see it coming together more and more. There's a wonderful painting, Northern Renaissance painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder, called Children's Games, and really like the essence of play is summed up in this one painting, where you have basically two aspects. So you've got people like little kids working together and playing together and playing within the environment, so there's a kind of augmented aspect to it. But then you also have like kids in little corners playing themselves and in the little windows, and they're wearing masks and they're doing these kind of activities. And that always reminds me of the kind of virtual route that we're taking. So there's the augmented, go out into the city and kind of explore like Pokemon Go and, interact with other human beings. But we do need occasionally to escape from that as well and go into our own interior spaces. So I really see the future of play as not only a synthesis of architectural real life space and sort of virtual space, but a continuation of that very old Peter Bruegel idea of on one hand embracing society and then at the other hand escaping. I think we have that dynamic. We need to do both at various different times in our lives.
I think it raises some really interesting points. If you think about the playground, the playground is a place for extroverts, isn't it? We go out and we play together and we're quite loud with our play. Whereas maybe when we think about video games, traditionally it has, up until quite recently, been associated with single player experiences, hasn't it? And being alone in a space. And neither one of those are better or worse than the other. And I think that we need to think about the types of people that we have and the experiences that they might want to create when we make video games or when we make play in public. Because what you were saying about running into a space and wanting to wave your arms about it, big spaces do endear that for some people, but for other people it invites reflection, doesn't it? So as makers, when you are looking at your player and you're looking at physical space and you're looking at play, how do you consider all these different variables, I guess? That's a huge question.
We had an interesting project recently where we were invited to design or co-design a playground, a physical playground. And we learned a lot from looking at the way that playgrounds have traditionally been made and the various people that have kind of broken the rules and created new kind of forms of play. And it's just really interesting in terms of this kind of dynamic range of what play can be and what kind of environment you want to offer to this range of people for different kinds of things, and how a lot of the time play is very much as it becomes removed from the source, which in this case would be human children, and becomes a bit more commodified, you lose that sense of free play, and it becomes much more about modular components that you can bring in that create a certain type of play. So it's what you call like directional play, I suppose, rather than non-directional play. And it's really important for us when we were considering this is to think, well, you definitely want to have a space where people can have a range of experiences and have give people the space to make their own games up, because that's a super important part of play, is like making your own rules and all that kind of thing. So in terms of the kind of extension of our understanding of what gameplay and gameplay design may or may not be, just the opportunity for us to enter that space and to be asked to help was really helpful for us for our practice. And I think we have got a lot to offer because our perspective is different to the kind of what's become the norm, if you like. We were just discussing this before the thing, how important it is to have these external perspectives in order to help things evolve and change and not get too bogged down in the systems and processes that already exist. They've been created to get to everyone to a certain point and then ease the flow and remove the friction to get from A to B. Sometimes it's important to have a different perspective to throw up a problem or to say that doesn't satisfy my needs or what have you.
I think actually that is a really good point to bring back to what Darran was saying about the potential cross-pollination between architecture and games. Hilary, in Playable Cities, what are you seeing developing there, and what do you think that these different practitioners can offer each other?
I'm no expert in architecture, but I think definitely stealing tools, first of all, is really cool, and the more opportunity people have to actually fit in each other's disciplines, even for like a short while, to understand a little bit of someone's perspective, is really great. One of the things we do when we commission work is we deliberately use the word creative when we try to commission, because then loads of different types of people apply. Because if you say artist, then people go, well, I'm not an artist, I'm a game designer, and they immediately count themselves out from something. So we try and say, well, great, or if you do apply for commission and you don't know something, then say you're going to, is that me making loads of noise? Sorry. That we try to bring different perspectives in, or make a gang of people that are from different perspectives. I think that's, but going back to what you said earlier about where do you start, one of the big things that we've learned and which we have to fight for all the time is, especially when you go to another country, is taking the time to just be there and just like stop designing, just stop it, don't start yet. Just be there for ages in those spaces. I mean, I'm speaking specifically about stuff in public space, but the amount of time you will save in the long run and the better your design will be if you just hang out in those places with actual real people and do really ordinary things. That's our first sort of like absolute research. What's the thing you put in buildings? Yeah, you know.
Temple, flagpole.
The things they put in there, I don't know that yet. But yeah, so I think there's a lot, and it's quite exciting now. But like when you asked about the future of play for this panel, I was like, I don't know what the future is. But actually, one really exciting thing is all of these tools will become cheaper and easier to, make new modifications of, and that will be really exciting when, ordinary people get their hands on tools that are traditionally thousands and thousands of pounds and really hard to train to use, I think exciting stuff will come out of that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot in video games, aren't we? This kind of democratization of technology, accessible hardware, easier ways of making things interactive, and it's exciting to think about how that might change public spaces as more diverse voices move into making interactive media. And I think we need to maybe reconsider what we're calling games. I think I'm pointing at particular disciplines, but you're making a very good point that we should maybe be thinking about creatives, and actually this isn't an exclusive space for particular types of creatives. It should be open to all.
Yeah, that's the problem with language, like you said. Putting forward, is this super loud? putting forward a commission of some kind, and like you said, being careful to try and include people, and inclusivity and accessibility and diversity are, sure, they're big buzzwords, but they are super important in any cultural kind of program or any cultural experience, because that is what we are. We're a bunch of different weird people with our own perspectives on things, and it's not for one person or another to have power over another in terms of what a space is or what it's for. And I think in terms of the kind of space architecture city-wide thing, that's really important to me, because I feel like a lot of the time we've all been brought up in these kind of cultural spaces with certain expectations born into them and learned, and there are things like where are the space for people to express themselves? Where are the space for people to, like, graffiti is a really good example of how that can be a form of expression and a form of kind of independence and freedom and ownership. But at the same time, I feel like we can do more to make our spaces more inclusive, more interactive, more fun. And if you look around and you walk around in cities, most of the time there's these huge buildings that are there that they're sending messages out to you, and most of those messages are very much like, we own this, you stay there, don't come near me, this is my space. And actually it's for everyone. So, and this kind of idea of fun and play and gamifying, or whatever you want to call it, any space is, I think it's really important. It's actually a political thing. Yeah. It's actually a form of rebellion. It's a form of acknowledgement of society and the culture that we're in. So there's a lot of, I'm really excited about the potential for this democratization of ideas and forms of expression in shared spaces. And in terms of video games, like, there are these amazing tools, and they are becoming really cheap and free for people. But they're stuck on the screen for the most part. Most people will still limit themselves to that space there. Whereas what's really exciting for us is, how can we start bringing that out onto the streets, and how can we start getting this kind of idea in conceptual space and freedom of expression out into a space that we can all share.
It kind of picks up on something that Hilary said about us having these preconceived ideas of behaviours that we're allowed to carry out in certain spaces. You know, so you're talking about a building looks like we own this space, stay away. You know, in the politics of public space and whether we feel comfortable doing something in that public space actually stops us from maybe challenging, or as you say, being political and or an activist and pushing the kind of behaviours in space and redefining that space for ourselves. But I think I want to maybe go back to Darren's first point, if that's okay, because I realise we're talking a lot about blurring of spaces, but actually it doesn't necessarily need to be that we all become creatives that blur the boundaries and our practice doesn't sit in one particular field. You know, lots of people are quite happy working in their individual field and collaborating across their fields. So I think one of the first things you said that was that architects and game makers could learn from each other. Do you want to talk a little bit from your studies of these individual forms, what you see that being?
There's a kind of, if you think about what play is, so it's an interaction with space and other people and a kind of negotiation and a learning process. But it's also establishing territories and establishing a sense of individual sovereignty, you know, that this is my place. And every real cultural form, you know, graffiti, for example, or parkour or something like that, is not only an interaction with an urban environment, but it's someone saying, well, this is here am I, you know, this is my space, this is something I can do to show that that's your you know, you belong in a sense. And I think it's an instinctive thing that doesn't need to be taught. I think it's in every single child. I don't know if people realise, but adventure playgrounds, or junk playgrounds as they may be called, was an idea that developed in the 1940s, where it was like just give kids this kind of like almost like a scrapyard and just let them build stuff and let them do their own thing. Now that sounds like a very kind of, you know, Montessori kind of progressive idea, but that actually came out of occupied Holland, where the Nazis had taken over, and there were children who were playing in the rubble of sites that were bombed in Rotterdam, I think it was, and they were getting shot because they were being mistaken for looters. And these two architects and a sort of urban theorist started creating these secret spaces that couldn't be seen. They built them down into these kind of craters, and they surrounded them with fences, and the kids could go in and play, and that's the first adventure playgrounds, you know, came from this. And it was because children instinctively will do that anyway, and if you need to take them out of a dangerous environment. So that's an example of the kind of instinctive nature. But I think going back to the technology part, I mean, I work with architects, and we do for clients, you know, we'll create like augmented reality or virtual reality walkthroughs of the buildings so that they can see the buildings before they're built. And that's all very interesting and everything, but it doesn't really get to the, I mean, that's my work, but there is something lacking. I feel like there's deeper things we can be doing, and more creative things, and more kind of things to encourage sovereignty. For example, say virtual reality, everyone thinks, well, it's going to be games, you know, it's going to be play. And I think we need to expand the definition of play in terms of virtual reality. I mean, there's surgeons being taught how to do surgery through virtual reality, there's pilots, astronauts, but there's also people with like agoraphobia who can't go out into the urban environment. And there's a wonderful photographer called, she goes under the name The Agoraphobic Traveller, and she is a lady from New Zealand, but she lives in London, and she has agoraphobia, so she can't go out and enjoy the urban space the way most of us can. So she goes on to Google Street View, and she finds beautiful portraits. She just sifts through the world's streets, and she will find unusual sights. So like, you know, like a horse galloping down a street in Mexico, and she'll manipulate the image so it's a portrait. So in a way, she's out there exploring the world. And I could see virtual technology definitely, as it gets more affordable and accessible, going in that direction. So, you know, if someone's bedbound, if someone's agoraphobic, and perhaps even, you know, there could be a degree of exposure therapy where people are gradually brought back into society and back out, you know, out of isolation through things like virtual technologies. So I mean, that's the most interesting synthesis I see. The architecture thing is fascinating too, because all architecture is basically unbuilt and virtual to begin with. You know, it comes out of people's heads. So combining those two things, I think we can learn from one another, but I'm always keen to kind of see the human dynamic to all this. Where is it actually leading for individuals?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there is so much that we could talk about, I think. You know, it's funny you say we need to expand the definition of play, and Tom's quoting that play is already 7 pages, and I think play is a very difficult thing to wrangle, it's a difficult thing to define, and I know in academia we're always arguing about what play is. But I think you're totally right in this idea of taking these technologies and repurposing them in different ways and being more open-minded about how we're using technologies and the experiences we create, and putting the user at the centre and how it can benefit the user, the player, the audience, whatever we want to call them. We're going to actually, unfortunately, have to wrap up. So I'll maybe finish on a question that goes back to the title of the panel. And hopefully people will have a chance. Are you guys here all day if people want to come and talk to you about something we've covered or your practice? Yeah. But we'll maybe finish with the future of play. So where do you see play technology, this blurring of boundaries, being in 25 years or so? Sorry, it's a hard question.
I'm going to quote Brian Eno again. I just really like Brian Eno. You should listen to his music. He said a really interesting thing recently in a talk where he said that architects don't finish buildings, they just start them. And then, you know, the function of the building might change, it might get knocked down, it might get transformed. So they sort of let a building loose. Like this building here, you know, who knows what this building will be in 100 years. It might be the V&A, it mightn't be here. And I think that games are they're increasingly going to head the direction of the programmer or designers will just put them out into the world, and especially, you know, harnessing algorithms and things. I could see games not only embracing in terms of augmented reality, you know, the actual environment, but bringing levels of creativity by the user that we haven't really seen quite yet. I know there are games where, you know, people can design things like Minecraft or whatever, but I would love to see like an augmented reality games where you go out, you explore the urban environment, you can learn about the history of a place. So there's no reason why we couldn't have like annotated buildings, or you could actually holographically see buildings that used to be there. So you can learn about the history of your own city and then get a real sense of belonging because of that. But also be creative with it. You know, every experience of a city is subjective, and I'd love to see designers really embrace that. So why not have an augmented reality city where you can change everything? You know, like holographically, you can make your own version of, everyone can have their own version because everyone already does have their own version of every city. So I'd love to see that being really embraced.
That's wonderful.
Nice. This might sound bad, but I was thinking of this. It's like, I think what I'm excited about is for games not to be new anymore. Like the amount of times I like shout at the BBC and I'm listening to something like, who knew, surely they should be reading a book, and I'm really looking forward to, in like 20, 30 years time, when all of those gatekeepers and people who just think, oh, games are over here, but a film is art, just get out of the way and let all the kids who are playing Fortnite now just be like, yeah, it's a game, whatever, come on, give me something new. You know, that generation will start to be the people in professional businesses and making policy decisions and just being like, yeah, get on board or don't, but, you know, let's not have this conversation anymore. So I think that's going to be really exciting because they're already, like, teenagers are so skilled already that all of the stuff that we're still catching up with will just be normal. And then people, I think, can really start to go wild, and that'll be exciting, hopefully.
Cool. And so I think one of the things that is I'm finding a lot at the moment is this increase in sensors everywhere, and you can't go to the bathroom without some kind of sensor allowing you to wash your hands or dry your hands or wipe your bum or whatever it is, and I'm finding that kind of both frightening and awesome, because the idea that with the increase of your environment being aware of you, that increases the opportunities for you to interact with it in interesting ways. And so I see this kind of the increase of potential interactivity with your environment as really exciting, and of course to be able to hack it and change it and what have you is also really scary. But I think there's a quote that I really like from Marshall McLuhan, which is you shape your tools and then your tools shape you. It's a classic, and I think if you think of the city as a tool, as a way for something that we built in order for us to exist and navigate and share experiences, we start. The more I'm interested in the diversity of the people who are shaping the city or the planet or whatever it might be, creating the kind of planet that we want it to be, creating the kind of space that we want it to be. And we will make it playful because we're playful creatures. So I see it as kind of, that's not really an answer to your question, but that's what I'm looking at.
Increased agency, but also more diverse voices in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Could you join me in thanking Hilary?